Keeping to the theme of Mother's Day, today I'm going to just show you how to make these hazelnut honey Koeksisters, which is an adaptation to the old traditional nostalgic recipe of my grandmother's. So many of you might be wondering what a Koeksister actually is. It is a South African traditional dessert made from frying a little bit of, similar to bread dough, made out of milk and flour, frying it in some hot oil and immediately dunking it into a cold syrup, the action of which shrinks the gas and sucks in all of the syrup, making a succulent, juicy, full of moisture pastry. How we prefer to eat these is to put them in the freezer, and because of the high sugar content, they don't actually freeze solid, they become sort of chewy. Yeah, today we want to make Koeksisters, and I've got my grandmother here to give us the traditional real recipe for Koeksisters, the Afrikaans manier. So yeah, we're only making 2 dozen today, just so that it's a little bit more digestible. If we want to do the whole process, we usually make 8 dozen together, and it takes the whole afternoon. And so now we're just for this video, we're giving you a nice short little presentation. Recording. The thing that me and my grandmother are laughing about here is it's actually her secret to keeping all her recipes, and it's been quite a little bit of a struggle for me over my life to try and determine exactly what she means. But the recipe for this, as she's written, says 3 koppies meal and 3 stort koppies milk. Now in English, what a stort koppie milk is just a little bit of overflowing. So you don't really know exactly how much Oma knows exactly how much to overflow, but you kind of try and adapt it. I'll write up what I think is the right amount of milliliters on the recipe that you'll see just below. Yeah, I'm just going to give you a short presentation. What we have here is we have 500 milliliters of self-raising flour. You can also use cake flour, but you need a very fine grade flour when you're making any kind of dessert. Your pastries always require a delicate flour for a delicate product in the end. What we have here is we've got half a cup of milk, which I'm going to warm up in the microwave now.
Lukewarm.
So that, yeah, as my grandmother says, we want to achieve lukewarm milk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to warm that up really hot and then just add cold milk to it again, just to achieve that equilibrium of temperature. Here we have 125 milliliters of chopped hazelnut, just roughly chopped. You want them big and small, just for different texture variation in your Koeksisters. The most important thing to remember is, in fact, not the recipe. It's your techniques when you're cooking and when you're working with the dough.
As light as possible.
As light as possible, yeah. So I've got my 500 milliliters of flour, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my 10 grams of butter and just essentially turn it into little breadcrumbs. Just rub the flour into the fat. It is the best way of ensuring that your fat incorporates with your dough and that you don't have little bits of fat sitting on the clumps. When working with a well and you're making a dough, always try and mix your dough from the inside outwards. Don't try and attack it from the outside, because you'll make a little tunnel and all the water will just run away from you. You slowly want to combine all the ingredients, make a bit of a slurry, making sure that you don't have too many lumps. Now the big advantage with granite, once again, is once you've heated it up to a lukewarm temperature, it pretty much governs the temperature of your dough as you continue. So you can be very stable with your workings. Now that the solution is much thicker, we can start to destroy the well shapings. Always remember to work towards your center, because later on you're going to have to clean this up, so yeah, try not to make too much of a mess. There's my stem. So as you develop your dough, it starts to become more and more sticky. But don't worry, all of the stuff that sticks on your hands and on the surface, as you develop, it'll start to pick it up again. As your gluten develops, it tends to stick to itself a lot better. So it makes your cleanup job a lot easier. Just remember to pick up all of the ingredients that you've scattered across the table and make sure that you get every last little bit off your hands. You've got a semi-combined dough ball. You don't really want to be kneading it like with bread. You really want to be folding it. Your technique doesn't really allow for gluten development, but it also allows air to be trapped in between the pockets, so that your baking powder's work is a bit less to do. Even if you just tap the dough, you can hear that there's a lot more air in it than a usual type of dough. So you don't want to lose that by working it too hard. Now, most people would use a rolling pin with their recipe for their dough, but as I told you earlier, you've got such a delicate balance of air that you don't really want to be forcing it out with any kind of apparatus like a rolling pin. So as you can see, I'm being very delicate with the dough, making sure not to add too much force to it. I've got a cast iron pot. I've taken it off the heat, but it's still cooking my hazelnuts. Now, the great thing about pastries, the great thing about granite and pastries, is that granite completely governs your temperature. So now to cool down these hazelnuts so that I don't warm up my flour by cooking it, I'm just going to throw it on the side on the cold granite and let it slowly cool. So the ideal time that my grandmother suggests that I work this dough for is around 10 minutes. But I'm going to stop at about 5 minutes so that I can work in my hazelnuts without really developing or losing air in the dough. So what I like to do is I like to stretch out the dough as wide as I've spread out my hazelnuts. Now this is an addition to the recipe. This is not my grandmother's traditional recipe. This is my own adaptation. So just press your dough on top of the hazelnuts, and as you turn it over, you see they stick very well to the center. Do that with the other side as well, whilst pressing down, making sure that you try and pick up as much of it as you can on your first attempt. Take the dough now and fold it in the center as we've done earlier, making sure that you don't force out too much of the air. Once you fold it in half, repeat until your hazelnuts have been folded nice and deeply into your dough without really having any areas that are too clumped up. So take a sharp knife and just cut your disc into a perfectly 3-shaped ball. Take each of your balls and shape them into sausages. And then cover with cling film to allow it to rest while it develops more of its air pockets. And you're just making sure with the cling film that the outside of the dough skin, you're not really giving it time to dry. What I've done now is I've just gotten a kitchen towel and dipped it in some boiling water. And the idea is just to wrap your cling filmed sausages just to keep them warm. Because heat is a catalyst for most of your kitchen reactions, especially infusing heat or rising dough. So after the first 5 minutes your towel would have gotten cold over the air, so just replace it with a warm towel and you'll feel that your dough at the end is still lukewarm. If you look at your final product, it's really filled out the plastic shell you encased it in earlier. But while I've done that, while it was resting, I have got my oil to a temperature that is ready to start frying. And I have taken out my syrup, which me and my grandmother prepared overnight. Essentially the syrup is a 50% combination of water and sugar. We've used 3 cups of sugar and 1.5 cups of water here. You then cook it for about 5 minutes with the lid on, 5 minutes with the lid off. And you also need to add 1 tablespoon of cream of tartar and a tablespoon of salt, just to make sure that it binds correctly and that your salt actually increases your sugar's flavor as well as your honey's flavor. We've now also taken that syrup that we made and mixed it 50-50 with honey to make it a more modern adaptation of Koeksisters. So just remember, when you're dusting a flour that's risen, you want to use as little of the flour as possible, because you don't really want to change the consistency of your dough. Also just remember, now that you're taking the plastic off, that previous smooth, non-sticky dough that you used to is completely changed. All of that moisture is now stuck to the outside of the dough, and it's once again become sticky. So remember that once you've dusted, your hands also need to have a little bit of flour on them. The cling wrap comes off quite easily. But trust me, if your fingers didn't have flour on it, your hands would all of a sudden be a dough glove. Make 12 incisions. Each of these represent a dozen of Koeksisters. We then take each of our 12 pieces and we cut it down the middle, but not piercing all the way through. This will leave us with a little man with 2 legs, you can imagine. What you can do now is you can twist the one side to the right, the other side to the left, and pinch the tip. And you've got your perfect little Koeksister shape. So to test the temperature of your oil, seeing as I don't have a thermometer handy, take a small piece of dough and we're just going to drop it in the oil. If it goes to the bottom and it just starts bubbling and immediately rises again, your oil is hot enough. So now we add our Koeksisters to the dough. Remember the spiral shape. Wait 15 seconds in between each one so that you give yourself time to dunk them in the syrup. A handy tip to remember when you're putting dough into hot oil is to take the product you've got and slowly move into the dough whilst letting go, so that there's no splashback of oil. Straight from the heat, let them cool down for a few seconds in the air and immediately dip them into our You've dunked them in the syrup and you felt that tremor that we were looking for earlier. You'll see that as you look into the side of your Koeksister, it almost looks like glass. You can see into the center of the dough itself.
Die koekjes zijn perfect uitgekomen, Chris.
Thanks, girl. That's great.